July 25, 1944. 9:37 hours. West of St. Lo, Normandy. Morning mist clung stubbornly to the hedgerows. General Lieutenant Fritz Berlin, commander of a panzer division, pressed cold steel field glasses to his eyes. For 6 relentless weeks, American guns had battered German lines without pause, a storm of iron that became the rhythm of each day. Yet now silence. No rolling thunder. No distant echoes. Only quiet. The veterans around St. Lo, men who had once marched under Rommel across the burning deserts, shifted nervously in their foxholes. They had endured Soviet barrages that seemed to shake the earth itself, and they had survived the merciless bombardments at El Alamein. But this silence unsettled them more than the noise ever had. Something unnatural was building. At 9:38, the illusion of calm shattered. Over 1,000 American artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously. Not in sequence, not in creeping barrages as doctrine prescribed, but all at once. An apocalyptic roar of steel and flame. From 6 miles to 15, light 105 mm howitzers, 155 mm mediums, towering 8-inch heavies, even monstrous 240 mm batteries. All their shells struck in the same instant. It was not simply firepower. It was precision turned into annihilation. Every gun had been ordered to fire at a staggered moment, calculated backwards so that shells from different ranges with different flight times would all land together. A storm of metal arriving in one heartbeat, as though the very sky had detonated. What the Germans faced that morning was not just an artillery barrage. It was the arrival of time on target TOT. A revolution in warfare born of mathematics, technology, and the industrial might of the United States. The break with tradition. To grasp the significance of that July morning, one must understand what came before. For centuries, artillery followed predictable rhythms. Napoleon's Grande batteries pounded targets in waves. In World War I, creeping barrages advanced slowly ahead of infantry, step by bloody step. German doctrine, Schwerpunkt, perfected concentrated fire at decisive points, flexible and devastating when directed by skilled forward observers. Through Poland, France, and into Russia, German gunners earned a reputation for speed and accuracy. At Kasserine Pass in North Africa, American artillery had seemed clumsy in comparison. Dispersed, uncoordinated, slow. German officers concluded the Americans were second-rate. They had missed one critical truth. America was learning. What emerged in 1944 was something entirely new. The U.S. Army no longer saw artillery as individual batteries supporting local units. Instead, they conceived of artillery as a network, an orchestra of steel where every gun could be synchronized with mathematical precision. Time on target wasn't an incremental improvement. It was a leap, a shift from 19th-century gunnery to modern industrialized firepower. The machinery behind the miracle. Executing TOT required for interconnected innovations that Germans had not anticipated. Forward observers, FOs. American observers weren't limited to directing a single battery. They could call down the fire of entire artillery groups, even corps-level assets. Equipped with SCR-619 and later SCR-610 radios, they had reliable communication stretching miles. What a lone German observer could do with a battery, an American FO could do with dozens of battalions. The Fire Direction Center, FDC. Born from experiments at Fort Sill in the 1930s, the FDC was the brain of artillery coordination. Here, trained teams worked with firing tables, slide rules, and graphical firing boards, calculating firing solutions for multiple units at once. What seemed impossible before, making hundreds of guns fire as one, became routine with the FDC. Communications infrastructure. The U.S. Army laid wire across Europe with obsessive intensity. A single division might spool out 3,000 miles of telephone line in 1 month. Combined with radios, this redundant network ensured fire orders traveled instantly and without interruption. Standardization of ammunition. Every 105 mm shell, whether forged in Pennsylvania or Missouri, flew with identical ballistic characteristics. German shells, increasingly made in scattered workshops using slave labor, varied in quality. For Americans, precision was a guarantee. For Germans, it was guesswork. These 4 pillars, FOs, FDCs, communications, and standardization, made time on target not only possible but devastatingly reliable. The curtain rises. Operation Cobra. By July 1944, the American High Command was ready to unveil TOT on a scale never before attempted. Operation Cobra, the breakout from the Normandy hedgerows, would begin with a bombardment of unprecedented intensity. General Omar Bradley assembled the largest American artillery force in Europe to that point. Over 1,000 tubes lined up, 105 mm howitzers, 155 mm guns, 8-inch behemoths, mortars, and even tank destroyers pressed into indirect fire. In all, the U.S. Army allocated 170,000 artillery shells for Cobra. At 9:38, after waves of heavy bombers had softened German positions, every American gun fired. Shells from batteries scattered miles apart converged in seconds upon the Panzer Lehr division and elements of the 5th Parachute Division. The earth convulsed under the synchronized impacts. Survivors compared the landscape afterward to the surface of the moon. General Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer Lehr, sent a desperate report. 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, or numbed beyond recognition. My front line no longer exists. The Panzer Lehr Division, once a proud elite formation, ceased to exist as a fighting force in a single day. German counterattack, crushed by precision. Hitler, enraged by the American breakout, ordered a counteroffensive at Mortain on August 7. Elite formations, the 1st and 2nd SS Panzer Divisions, along with the 116th Panzer, were hurled forward in an attempt to cut off the American advance. But American observers on Hill 317 had pre-registered every approach route. When the German armor began to roll, they called in repeated time on target missions. The 2nd Infantry Division alone fired 20 TOTs in a single night. German survivors described it as hitting invisible walls of fire. Assembly areas disappeared in seconds. Approach roads turned into killing zones. By dawn, the offensive was broken. Field Marshal von Kluge informed Hitler bluntly, continuation was impossible against such American firepower. The science of destruction. To achieve TOT, American gunners had to solve equations so complex that older armies would have thought them impossible in combat. They accounted for range and azimuth of every battery, shell weight and aerodynamics, powder temperature affecting muzzle velocity, wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes, air density, temperature, and even the rotation of the Earth for long-range shots. To process this in real time, they used graphical firing tables, GFTs, and graphical sight tables, GSTs, computation tools that allowed fire direction centers to calculate in minutes what once took hours. German artillery, by contrast, still relied on conventional firing tables and individual battery calculations. They could not match the speed, let alone the precision. Training an army of mathematicians. The miracle of TOT was not just industrial, it was human. At Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the U.S. Field Artillery School compressed decades of artillery science into 17-week programs. Civilians became mathematicians of war, drilled in meteorology, survey methods, and communications. By graduation, an FDC team could calculate a 10-battery TOT in less than 3 minutes. The scale was staggering. In 3 years, the U.S. trained more fire direction specialists than Germany had produced in decades. Military education became a production line, churning out skilled crews as reliably as factories produced shells. The weather war. Precision required knowledge of the skies. Every U.S. Corps had meteorological units releasing weather balloons to 30,000 feet. These radiosondes reported temperature, wind, and pressure, feeding the data directly to FDCs. The results were astonishing. During the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, where Germans believed thick woods rendered artillery nearly useless, American gunners adapted. They programmed shells to burst in the treetops. Splintered wood and burning phosphorus rained down, igniting the forest and shredding dug-in troops. German medical reports from the forest recorded unprecedented psychological collapse. Soldiers rendered combat ineffective not by wounds but by the sheer shock of synchronized devastation. The Falaise Pocket. In August 1944, As German forces tried desperately to escape encirclement in the Falaise Pocket, TOT reached its apotheosis. American batteries, spread across wide distances, massed fire with devastating synchronization. Escape columns of vehicles and infantry were obliterated in minutes. Survivors spoke of walls of explosions that erased entire units before they could move. The dream of a German counteroffensive in Normandy ended not in tank battles, but under the crushing weight of American artillery mathematics. Legacy of time on target. By late 1944, German officers finally understood what they were facing. Time on target was not merely a tactical trick. It was a manifestation of American industry, science, and organization applied to war. Standardization, communication, mass production of both weapons and trained minds. Together they transformed artillery from a supporting arm into the decisive weapon of the battlefield. Operation Cobra was the proof. With one synchronized heartbeat of fire, American artillery had broken open the German front in Normandy and rewritten the doctrine of modern war. As the German army struggled to slip through the shrinking gap, the Americans unleashed a storm of artillery fire. On August 17, 1944, alone, U.S. gunners carried out carefully timed time-on-target strikes along the Falaise, Ardennes escape routes. Every 30 minutes, batteries opened up in unison, hammering the congested roads where columns of men, tanks, and horse-drawn wagons were trying to flee. General Hans Eberbach, commanding the shattered remnants of Panzer Group West, admitted later that the fire was so concentrated that reserves could not move forward, nor could the wounded be pulled back. Attempting to drive a vehicle on those roads was nothing less than suicide. The infamous route near Falaise soon earned the grim name, the Corridor of Death. Burned-out tanks, wrecked trucks, lifeless horses, and abandoned equipment piled up into obstacles that slowed retreating units, leaving them even more exposed to the next wave of fire. By the time the pocket slammed shut on August 21st, nearly 50,000 German troops were captured and another 10,000 lay dead, most of them victims of artillery. Yet the torment did not end at the Seine. As German forces fell back toward the river crossings in late August, they discovered that not even bridges offered sanctuary. American forward observers had slipped ahead of their main lines, setting up vantage points over every potential crossing site. At Vernon, Rouen, and Mantes, German engineers tried to throw pontoon bridges across the Seine. Each time, U.S. artillery struck with brutal precision, blasting bridges before they could even be completed, often killing the engineers still working on them. The destruction was so systematic that German units refused to attempt crossings in daylight, causing traffic jams on the riverbanks that became perfect targets for additional bombardments. By December 1944, American artillery had introduced a new terror, the variable time, VT, or proximity fuse. First used during the Battle of the Bulge, these revolutionary shells exploded in the air at the ideal height for maximum fragmentation. No foxhole, trench, or dugout offered safety. Once incorporated into time-on-target missions, the lethality was multiplied beyond imagination. Over 22 million VT fuses rolled off U.S. production lines, utterly transforming the battlefield. At first, German intelligence could not fathom what was happening. Reports speculated about aerial mines or new types of cluster munitions. The grim reality, that this was simply better timing and technology, was too unsettling to accept. When the Americans advanced into the formidable Siegfried Line in the autumn of 1944, the Germans believed their concrete bunkers and steel defenses would hold. But specialized artillery tactics proved otherwise. Combining instant-impact high explosives with delayed fuse armor-piercing shells, U.S. gunners achieved both surface devastation and deep penetration in the same strike. At Geilenkirchen, the 84th Infantry Division called in a massive time-on-target mission. 12 battalions, 144 guns, and a storm of mixed ammunition that cracked open the West Wall's defenses. Even in defense, the system proved decisive. During the Ardennes offensive, when the German onslaught threatened to break through in December 1944, U.S. artillery regrouped rapidly. On December 19th, as the 2nd Panzer Division pushed toward Dinant, American observers called in emergency fire. Within just 4 minutes, 8 battalions had their firing solutions ready. The resulting barrage annihilated the German column, An entire battalion erased in less than 60 seconds. At Bastogne, surrounded American units repeatedly called danger close missions, raining shells almost on their own positions to shatter German assaults. Time on target wasn't just attack. It was survival. By the spring of 1945, as Allied forces closed on the Rhine, time on target reached its ultimate scale. On March 24, during the massive Wesel crossing, no fewer than 4,000 guns, including 270 American pieces, fired in coordination. The opening bombardment lasted 4 hours, punctuated by perfectly synchronized strikes every 15 minutes. In March alone, American artillery fired more than 65,000 tons of shells. German defenders spoke of the earth itself shaking, of men found dead without a mark on them, killed by concussion alone. At Oppenheim, where Patton's Third Army forced the river on March 22, 33 battalions and 400 guns unleashed 10,000 shells in 1 minute of perfect unison. German officers later confessed that entire battalions simply ceased to exist. What they came to realize was chilling. Time on target was not just a tactic. It was the industrial system of the United States made manifest on the battlefield. The same methods that turned out a bomber every hour in Detroit now allowed artillery to coordinate hundreds of guns with machine-like precision.